The same year Alexander Hamilton was killed was also an election year. Jefferson had served 4 years. By 1804, he was really popular. He had cut taxes, cut the military, and acquired Louisiana. So when he ran for re-election against Charles Pinckney, he won overwhelmingly. Federalists only got, Pinckney only got 8% of the vote, electoral vote. So obviously Jefferson was incredibly popular, and he will have the same thing happen to him that happened to Washington. His first 4 years were generally considered a success because of domestic issues, and his second 4 years in office will be horrible due to foreign policy. And the problem was with the British. The United States didn't have an alliance with France anymore, and England, because it was fighting for its very survival. Napoleon was just cleaning up in Europe. So England was the last European nation that was actively fighting against Spain for a lot, or France for a lot of it. So England is just trying to survive. So it was desperate, and it started doing more things. It had been violating U.S. neutrality for a while, but it stepped it up in Jefferson's second administration in several ways. For one, it violated U.S. neutral rights. The United States is supposed to be a neutral nation, so it can trade with other nations. England started violating U.S. neutrality and started taking American ships. Another thing it did was start impressing American sailors. Being in the British Navy was horrible, so they actually started stopping U.S. ships and taking U.S. sailors out of U.S. ships and forcing them into the British Navy. Some of them were British sailors that actually did jump out of British ships near American shores, but most of them were American sailors. They impressed thousands of them. The United States cannot consider itself an independent, sovereign nation if another country is stopping its ships and taking its citizens. And how helpless the United States was in dealing with this became very obvious with an incident called the Chesapeake Affair. And this one was different because the Chesapeake was a U.S. naval vessel. So it's a vessel of the United States Navy itself. All the other impressments have been just U.S. trade or fishing ships. But a British ship attacked a U.S. ship called the Chesapeake and impressed 4 of the sailors. One of the sailors they executed, but they attacked a U.S. ship, U.S. battleship, so a ship of the U.S. Navy, while doing this. When the Chesapeake limped back into shore and Americans found out about what happened with the Chesapeake, Americans were furious. Americans clamored for war with England. The problem is the United States didn't have a navy. Remember, Jefferson had destroyed, or pretty much eliminated the Navy. The United States had like 16 ships. And so the United States couldn't do anything back. It didn't have enough power to tell England to stop doing this. It didn't have any force or any teeth. So, having no military option, Jefferson used economic coercion, and he passed what is universally considered a terrible act. It's important you know this. It's called the Embargo Act. And with the Embargo Act, Jefferson was trying to protect U.S. ships, U.S. sailors, and U.S. goods from the British, because the British were taking them, by prohibiting all trade with all foreign nations. That's what the Embargo Act did. It prohibits all trade with all foreign nations. This is an insane overreach of the government. The government can't tell all Americans they're not allowed to trade with any other country. It is so incredibly unconstitutional. And this is Jefferson doing it. Well, again, Jefferson's for a strict construction of the Constitution. How could he possibly justify prohibiting all trade? And to do this, he used a really broad construction of the Constitution. Instead of, he used the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Clause. According to the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Clause, one of the most important parts of the Constitution, the government can, Caddy, go away. Cats. Drive me crazy. I know, I'm abusing my cat. Where was I? Oh, Jefferson prohibited all trade. And the way he justified this constitutionally is the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Clause says government can regulate interstate and foreign commerce. Regulate means pass tariff and custom duties. Jefferson said regulate can also mean prohibit. And regulate and prohibit are two totally different things. So Jefferson, he is going so far beyond the Constitution's power, and then he took it even further. The problem with the Embargo Act is the United States is huge, and as you would expect, a lot of people just broke the law, especially people in the North. So they would, a ship in the North would leave from Boston, say, all right, we're going to go to South Carolina, and then be blown off course and go to England and trade. Well, so many people were breaking the Embargo Act that Jefferson actually started instructing customs collectors, so U.S. officials, U.S. government officials, to start seizing American goods on the suspicion that they might be used to break the Embargo Act. So now you have the government of the United States under Jefferson, who is against a large government that's going to encroach on individual freedom, taking people's private property on the suspicion that those people might break the law. This was such a large stretch of the Constitution and so far away from a strict construction of the Constitution, and it failed totally and completely. Partly because people broke the law, but also, remember, there's no taxes, so where's all the government money coming from? Trade. The United States absolutely need to trade, and 75% of U.S. trade was with England, so England is the United States' biggest trading partner, and it destroyed the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy tanked because of the Embargo Act. Jefferson was asking Americans not to sacrifice for their country. He was actually asking them to just rot, sit and rot from underneath. And it was going too far, and he blatantly violated the Constitution in so many ways. So, what does this say about Jefferson and his strict construction of the Constitution? He said he was for a strict construction during Adams and Washington's administration, and then during his own administration, he was not. Why? It's because a strict construction of the Constitution is meant to limit the power of the government. Well, Jefferson was wanting to use it when he wasn't in power to limit Washington and Adams' power, but when he was in power, no president wants their power diminished. So, he just ignored it, and say something very profound, all presidents do, because the Constitution was written hundreds of years ago, and the Constitution cannot take into account every future event. Definitely don't write this down, but the Constitution says some crazy stuff, because the people who wrote it weren't perfect, and the Constitution itself is not perfect. You don't have to write this down, but let me just give you one example. Constitution of the United States, sure you've all read it. Article 1 deals with the powers of the legislature. Article 2 deals with power of the presidency, executive. Article 3 is power of the judiciary. Article 1, Section 8, it starts listing the power of the legislature. To borrow money, to regulate commerce with foreign nation, it's Interstate Foreign Commerce Clause, coin money, establish post office. This is also where you get the necessary and proper clause. Necessary and proper for carrying into execution all foregoing powers, the most vague part of the Constitution. But here's the kicker. Has the power to declare war, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. According to our Constitution, the government cannot be supporting an army for more than 2 years. Why? Because the founders were all afraid of large standing militaries, and it's a dumb law. It's a dumb part of the Constitution. There's no one in 1943 that was saying, all right, well, the Constitution says we've got to stop now because it's only 2 years old. Let's leave Hitler alone, guys. And no one should, because that's just a dumb part of the Constitution. If you're a constitutional literalist, you believe the Constitution needs to be read word for word, line for line, you've got to very conveniently ignore stuff like this, because this is just a dumb part of the Constitution. There are other parts that are also dumb. So the Constitution, Jefferson is the founder of constitutional literalism, and he could not be consistent with it, because it's very hard to be consistent with strict construction when you get into power. Probably impossible. Jefferson ended his administration on a low note, and he will uphold Washington's tradition of only serving 2 terms, and he was happy to leave office. His successor, James Madison, and Madison will run against Federalist Charles Pinckney again, and Madison wins, but this time the Federalists do a little bit better. So it looked like the Federalists continued to get votes. They might be able to win the next election.